Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 27. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have an incredibly special guest tonight, Zak Gabor, outside of Boston. Zak and I go way back. And before I let Zak introduce himself, I actually want to introduce Zak for him. So I was in PT school at the time, getting into the Instagram scene, and I came across this post online that I didn't entirely agree with. I don't remember the details, but I essentially commented something and said, yeah, hey, Zak, came across your page, and essentially I think you're wrong here, and here's why. And a minute later, I got a DM, and he said, what's your phone number? And I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. So something inside of me said, you know what, let me see what he's about. Gave him my phone number. I picked up the phone and he said, man, I love what you're about. We need more people who challenge other people. And we immediately hit it off. And so, Zak, is my recollection accurate there?
Yes, it is. It's definitely very accurate. I feel like we might have conversed a little bit through Messenger first before I wasn't just like, give me your phone number. And then we got into it, but it was close to that.
Yeah, I could look back, but I like that version of the story better. So we'll stick with it.
Yep.
But yeah, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody listening, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So brief spark notes. I guess I've been practicing as a physical therapist for the last 7 years, which is crazy. I graduated in 2015 from Ithaca. Been up in Boston pretty much ever since, working for a company called Boston PT and Wellness, but that's been phasing out where I'm only there 2 days a week now. And we're all in trying to build up what started as the Level Up Initiative company that I co-founded and is now merged with a company near and dear to us, Clinical Athlete, and we're known as CALU. And it's basically just it's community, it's education, it's mentorship. But it's really about trying to instill values that we hold near and dear to our heart into the next generation so that we can actually start to see positive changes at the industry level, patient care, all those things. So that's a very general outline.
Yeah. And I was involved in the Level Up Initiative in the beginning. You were actually the mentor of my cohort, which I believe was the first ever cohort.
Yeah. Yep.
And
you were an OG.
I am an OG, and it was cool to see how it's grown since then, obviously. But before we dive into anything, I actually just wanted to ask you on the record, what was the turning point where you realized Level Up Initiative was something you wanted to create?
Yeah, I think it was just it was one of those things where you kind of, things kind of percolate and bubble for a while. And then you kind of just get your final straw where you're just like, I'm okay. I can't complain about this anymore, or I can't keep feeling this way. Like I need to at least do something about it. And I think that was it. It was like 2 years out of school and just the relentless BS being spread on social media about, different narratives about MSK pain, things that patients were coming in and saying. And it was just, there's a bunch of different things that had kind of come together for this perfect storm, but then had the idea for it and we just off to the races. I remember, you were one of the first people I called, I think, that was like, yo, I have this crazy idea. And here we are.
Yeah, I remember I was at my parents' house at the time. I was riding my bike around the neighborhood and you told me. I immediately knew it was a great idea with a lot of potential. And I'm really excited to see how it's grown. And now for a lot of people listening to this podcast, there's not a heavy background in healthcare or in physical therapy. So if you were to explain kind of like maybe one or two of the main problems that you're trying to solve with, Level Up Initiative, now CALU, what would you say that is for people who aren't familiar with the field?
Yeah, I would basically say that, to someone who's not familiar with healthcare, you would just go to your doctor or a physical therapist and basically trust what they're telling you, because why wouldn't you? And that's basically the biggest problem that we're trying to solve, is that a lot of the very well-intended things we're taught in school they still are around to this day, and they can be very unhelpful in a sense of creating narratives about like, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you need to move a super specific way, otherwise you're going to get hurt. And there's just so much evidence to show us a better way to do things, but it kind of challenges the status quo. So that's basically what we're trying to do, is we're trying to tackle that problem by instilling values of critical thinking, communication, into the next generation of providers, so we can tackle that in a constructive and responsible way, get better narratives out to our communities.
Yeah, yeah. And before we dive too deep into really the core four questions of this podcast, I want to read a quote from one of the books that I read through your mentorship, which was Being Wrong by Catherine Schulz. And one of the hardest things for anybody, but especially someone in the healthcare field, is to openly admit in front of the very people that they're trying to help that either you might be wrong or that you don't know something that you feel like maybe you should have the answer for. And so this quote has stuck with me for the past couple of years. And Catherine Schulz says, "To err is to wander, and wandering is the way we discover the world. And lost in thought, it is also the way we discover ourselves. Being right might be gratifying, but in the end, it is a static statement. Being wrong is hard and humbling and sometimes even dangerous, but in the end, it is a journey and a story." And that resonates with me on such a deep level because I'll be honest, I think I'll probably make it to my deathbed someday, whether that's 70, 80, 90, 100, 110 years old. And I'll realize that I still don't know so much about everything. And I'm curious what that quote and what that book and what that concept means to you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking I love that quote. And yeah, I love seeing that some of her work also speckled into your newsletter, which is awesome. But I think I think at the end of the day, it's like, how do you perceive being wrong? Do you see it as something that's negative and challenging to your identity or whatever? Or do you see it as an opportunity to grow and get better? And I like, with the emergence of growth mindset is this very like pop psych word. I know that can come across as corny, but it's really the truth. It's like, do you view that as like, oh shit, cool, like this is an opportunity that I could be less wrong about something or get better? And to me, that's really what I look at it as, is like, it's always just, we can always constantly improve. And unless you're open to that, it's going to be really tough to make the most of that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think the concept of being wrong goes hand in hand with the idea of hardship and struggle, obstacles and challenge, because in both scenarios, you're going up against something where your path ahead isn't smooth, right? There's something in your way that's impeding your forward progress. And they're growth opportunities if you choose to see them that way. And so with that being said, Zach, I want to ask you the first question. And the question is this: what is the hardest thing or circumstance that you've ever had to handle as a person?
Yeah. So this is super deep, and I've actually never talked about this on a podcast. So I figured, fuck it, why not? So yeah, all my closest friends, my Steph, my fiance, family, something that all of them know, but it's not something that I'm like super duper vocal about because it's just, it's personal. So long story short, I went through a ton of depression in my adolescent years in high school. And it was, without getting into too much of the details, centered a lot around sexuality and trying to figure that out. And from outside looking in, you would think, oh, this kind of like attractive, regular, cis hetero white male comes from a good family, athletic, has these things going for him. But man, I was suffering brutally, trying to figure it all out and being really confused. And, it wasn't until college that I was able to really take ownership over, some of the fluidity of my sexuality and really looking that in the mirror, and where it was something that was literally had me contemplating suicide, because that shit is just like, it's crazy. It's crazy thinking back to it, but that was the moment that changed my life, because owning that part about me, like, it's just totally lighter person, and it just freed me, like the anxieties and the weight of that just off my shoulders. I was able to really be my most authentic self. And I'm sure hearing that now makes more sense into some of the things around the Challenge Yourself campaign and things that we've done with Level Up, and maybe just part of my personality. But that, without a doubt, is the hardest thing that I've ever gone through. But and why I'm such a big believer in taking ownership and these types of things, because at the end of the day, without that experience, I would not be the person that I am, and so passionate about all these different things.
I love who you are, man. And I'm really grateful for you and for you sharing that. I didn't know that. And I can't imagine what that was like.
Yeah. It's all, I mean, look, it's, at the end of the day, I'm very lucky to have a great support system and social group that, while I didn't feel comfortable for the longest time and felt huge sense of shame with some of these things and just buried it, I felt lucky enough that I was able to eventually share it and have the support and love from everyone. And like I said, I wouldn't change it for the world, because it literally made me who I am and just a vigor for life, because I was on the cusp of some really dark places and dark thoughts. And then when you're on the other side of that, you're just like, man, I do not take one single fucking day for granted. And I think that's been a big part of giving me that sort of natural urgency that I kind of operate with.
Mm. What was the season of life like where you realized you needed to either be authentic or things were just never going to get better?
Yeah, it literally came to a point where I was like, everything was coming to a head. It was, freshman year of college, and I was basically coming to reckoning where it's just like, I can't live this lie anymore. I'm either going to kill myself, like literally, or I gotta say something, because I just can't. I couldn't sleep. It was crazy. And, thank God my sister was the first person I spoke to about it. And, yeah, it was super emotional, like telling them, my family and different people, but it was, it was basically just came to that tipping point, and I loved my family and friends too much that I couldn't imagine actually, doing the thing, so to speak. But yeah, it was more of just like wishing bad things would happen, being on a plane and things like that, but thankfully it kind of came to a head, and I had that support system that I was able to find the courage to just be like, what am I, life's not going to be worth living if it has to be like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I would imagine that people might hear that story and think, man, you get that weight off your chest and like all is well. And I would imagine that is not the case, where you tell one person and then you have to have that conversation again and again and deal with some new issues now. And what was that like after you decided, okay, I'm going to be authentic? What were some of the struggles like after that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just the constant, and this is something we all suffer as humans, is just constantly thinking about how we're being perceived by others. And it's like, and to be honest with you, that's a big reason why I personally don't feel like it's this thing that I need to be going around on my sleeve, being totally upfront about. I'll tell anyone, if they want to talk about it, I've open book. But part of the reason why I don't is because of all of the shit that comes along with, what are people going to think? What are people going to say? And yeah, there's definitely some little things that happen, but at the end of the day, all my friends had my back. All the people I cared about had my back. So if there's a couple of little shitty comments that you hear about here and there, that's the way, if that's how it's going to be, it's all good. You can't let that shit get in your way and, hold you back from moving forward and being yourself.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's been said that those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. And I think that's very true. And the other thing I'll say that I heard in recent weeks was just that what other people think of us is none of our business. And I thought it was just such a funny way to think of it, right? Like if someone else has a problem with us, like that's their problem. That's not our problem.
Yeah,
And yeah.
totally.
And so all right. So, right. You get through that season of life. You are where you are right now. You are engaged to the love of your life, Steph, who I'm going to have Steph on the podcast because she is just as incredible as you are.
Yep.
How does that play a role in your life today? If you don't mind me asking, is that something that complicates anything?
Honestly, no, because so the cool thing is like Steph and I have been best friends since like the beginning. So she knew, and with any relationship I had with anyone, you know, especially females, they knew this aspect about me from the very beginning, because that was what actually allowed me to enjoy myself in all the different ways. Was just being open. You know, it killed any anxiety I had, and so honestly, it doesn't really have any complications in my life at this point because it's just, I mean, it's crazy. It's been over 10 years since I kind of opened up about it anyway. And it just really allowed me to grow more and more comfortable with myself.
Mm.
And find out who I really am without any judgment or shame. And, you know, to this day, it's something that, you know, there's no real complications. Again, not something that I'm out there, you know, super duper vocal about all the time. But, you know, like I said, it's just a part of who I am. And I think the funny thing, I talked to Steph about this, and like sexuality is a really funny thing because, you know, we're raised in this culture that does make it very binary. And that's part of, in my opinion, what created so much suffering for me, is because it was like, well, wait, no, if it's this, then I can't be that. And that's what's so confusing. But in reality, like, it definitely is very fluid, and doesn't even need to be a whole discussion right now. But I tell Steph, I'm like, you know how many people are in relationships that are so dishonest and probably are somewhere along the spectrum and then end up doing some sketchy shit down the road in their relationship? I'm like, you know, not only that, but dealing with this and owning it probably makes, you know, that's the type of person you want to be with, someone that's truly honest and transparent about these things. So if anything, it's been something that's really strengthened our relationship.
That's really awesome. And I would say one of the most powerful words that I've come across in the past 5 years, and I can't even say it like that because I've come across it since I was in kindergarten, but the word "and." I think too often we say "but," and it's like, you know, I like this, but, or I feel this, but. And it's really, we live in an "and" world, right? You can be excited and afraid. You can like blue and red, right? You can, right? There's like, and I think we just, for whatever reason, and maybe it's just the culture that we live in, it seems like things are binary, that things are mutually exclusive, and it's not like that.
Yeah, man. But it's a whole can of worms. I mean, it's because now you're seeing it in today. It's really interesting how it's all still in our socialization and whatnot. But
yeah. What would you say to somebody who's listening to the podcast? And I'm going to ask this question in a different way at the end, but just on this topic, and then we'll kind of move on. If someone's listening and they're like, man, like, I feel like Zach probably felt 10, 12 years ago, like, and I don't know what to do. Like, what would you say to that person?
yeah, I mean, and that's part of what's made me want to be more vocal about it, is because I know for a fact that there are people are suffering going through this. And I know we're in a much more accepting culture now, like generally speaking, but there's still a lot of implicit stuff that holds people back. So if anyone is out there listening, I think if you're having those thoughts, you need to talk to someone about it. You need to, and even if it's not like, even if it starts with just one person that you really trust, you just gotta take that leap, because it's going to change your life, you know, because the thing is you don't even know, like, anxiety and depression will do so much to change who you really are, that I think that's what's so confusing, is like, until you're really free to be your true self, which doesn't happen until you have that conversation with anyone. You know, I had no judgment or preconceived thing about, no, this is what I am. I just started kind of going with it. You know what I mean? But that would never have happened unless I was able to have that first conversation and get that weight off, you know, and allow myself to kind of see what happens.
That is such an interesting statement, that our anxieties and our worries and our fears actually just alter, you know, our headspace in a way that it just can confuse us even more as to who we are. I'd actually never thought about it like that before. And I think that's a really useful way to look at things. And so talking to other people about what you're struggling with on the inside is clearly a great way to go about, you know, like relieving some of that internal tension, getting an outside perspective. Is there anything else that you wish you did earlier on in that journey?
I don't know. Like, looking back, it's hard to change anything.
Mhm.
Because I think that is part of the hard thing too, is like when you are in your adolescent years, like you literally actually don't know, like you don't know exactly who you are yet.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what's hard if you're like putting your foot down as like a 12-year-old or 13-year-old and making this bold statement, you know, it's hard because then what if things change? You know what I mean? So I don't know if I have a great answer to that. Because things played out just fine. But it's tough to say because I don't know, you know, I don't know that I would have changed it.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Well, with that being said, let's move on to something that maybe you did more on purpose. And the question is, what is the hardest thing that you've ever pursued on purpose, and why did you do that thing?
Changing the physical therapy industry.
There you go. Well, so we talked about it a little bit in the
uh,
beginning, but I mean, obviously there are numerous challenges that come along with one, starting a business, two, taking any idea and then materializing that in the real world, but three, trying to really incite positive change in something that is already so established with these norms and these. So tell us a little bit about what was hard.
oh my God. Well, first off, it's so multifactorial and so multi-layered, you know. On one end of things, like we're trying to get academic reform because if we can get, you know, if there's 10,000 new clinicians graduating every year and, you know, 90% of them are still going out and spreading well-intended, but, you know, pardon my French, shitty narratives about musculoskeletal pain, that's a problem.
Mhm.
So how do we tackle that? You know, and then there's the boards. So the board exams that PTs need to take are very outdated, but schools need to teach their students how to pass the board. So it's one doesn't just have academic reform because you need to have boards reform. So that in and of itself is a hard element right there. Another hard element is that there's so much noise in the education realm of healthcare and physical therapy where there's just a lot of different systems and companies and methods trying to sell you the best way to do things. So it's hard to be in that market and not be predatory and do a good thing, hence doing a free mentorship. So that's another challenge, running a sustainable, profitable business while doing it via a free mentorship, at least to start, right? Um, I think another challenge is that the stuff we're talking about is not sexy at all. A lot of musculoskeletal students, they go into school and they have this kind of aspirations to be these fixers with, you know, cool techniques using their hands or tools or modalities. That's what I wanted. That's what I kind of envision for myself, like being a great manual therapist. And so when you're talking about trying to teach great communication skills and more of these quote unquote soft skills, like it's not really super sexy. So it's even harder to sell that. So these are, I think that's a good starting point. I mean, these are just some of the challenges. And then on top of that would be doing it while working full time. When I first
Mhm.
started was building this out on the side while
Yeah.
working 40 hours a week.
So I definitely want to talk about that because that's something that you and I both share in common. But before we get to that, I want to ask just a simple question. It sounds like this is an extremely daunting undertaking with a low chance of making a significant change in the short term. A lot of people would look at that and throw up their hands and say, I'm not going to be able to make a change. Like, why, why go through all this? Why did you choose to do it anyway?
Yeah, right. It's like, it's such a good question. And I don't even know if I ever will, but I know that I can go to my deathbed a
Mm,
happy person knowing that I gave it my all, you know, trying to shift the future of this profession. And, you know, it's kind of crazy because we've been at it now for like a solid 5 years. And there's a lot of days that I feel like throwing in the towel, but you know, there's definitely you're starting to see some ripples and you're starting to see some shifts. And there's still a ton of work to go. Where, like I said, I don't know that I'll ever see the real change that we're in it for in my lifetime. But knowing that we're influencing, because that was the whole idea, was like we just want to be able to continue to influence the next generation of leaders, people that are going to go out and make an impact and kind of create that positive ripple. Case in point, the work that you're doing, not that we're a small part of that, but knowing that we could help invest in people like yourself, like that was what it was always about. So yeah, I don't know. I forget what you asked.
No, that was beautiful, man. I have two quotes. One is a little bit longer, so I'm going to go with that one first. And this quote came to mind when you were talking about the why, and just being able to know that you tried your best and that you gave it your all. And I think too many people shy away from things that are scary or hard or big or daunting because they don't know whether or not they could ever be successful. But I think that the worst feeling in the world, at least for me, is regret. And I never want to get to the end of life, whenever that is, and look back and wish that I had tried when I didn't. And so the quote is from Les Brown, and he said, "The graveyard is the richest place on earth because it is here that you will find all the hopes and dreams that were never fulfilled, the books that were never written, the songs that were never sung, the inventions that were never shared, the cures that were never discovered, all because someone was too afraid to take the first step, keep with the problem, or determined to carry out their dream." And whether or not you elicit the change that you're looking to make in your lifetime or after your lifetime or ever won't really matter in the end because you followed your heart and you did something that you cared about. And that brings me to the second quote, which is a Greek proverb actually. And it goes like this: "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit." And essentially, you're a young man planting trees.
Yeah. We out here planting.
And so I guess what I want to get down to now is a little bit on a more practical level, because there are a lot of people listening to this podcast who do have aspirations, who do want to make a change, make a difference, do something meaningful, but they don't know how to get from where they are now to where they want to be. And a lot of that centers around finance specifically, just to be completely honest, right? You're tied down to a 40-hour a week job. It pays the bills. You've got health insurance. How do you make that transition? So for you, what was that like?
Yeah, that's the ultimate conundrum. And that's the conundrum we still find ourselves in, right? Is like, how do you run a truly, not even mission driven, but like such an impactful, large scale mission while also being a sustainable business is the ultimate problem. Like, it's really difficult to do. So I think to the first part of your question, it was like, how do you even get started in that? And I think the one piece of advice that I would have there is like, I think that's why what enabled me to do this was the connections and the network that I had built up. And it was literally just from connecting with people who shared that drive and that mission of like wanting to see change, and just connecting with some of those authentic people. That's what started it all. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to just be like, I'm going to do this had I not had this like pretty robust network of people that all really cared about this mission. And that kind of, it's like, right. It's such a slog, like getting to the end of this all, but it's almost like having that community and having that network of people that also share in the mission and that why, it's almost like becomes a part of your extended self, where it's like, okay, like I got a whole squad of people that believe in this mission. And so it's like, that gives you some of the fuel and confidence to be like, cool, like I'm good to take on the brunt of this suffering, but it's helpful to have that as fuel to keep going.
Wow, that's beautiful. You view your community as an extended part of yourself, which I think is really, really cool. I just listened to a commencement speech from 2005, David Foster Wallace, and he had this great line in there that I'm going to paraphrase, but he said that most of us think that freedom is building a tiny skull-sized kingdom where we are at the center of our own universe, alone amidst all of creation. Right? I totally butchered that. But the idea is, I think too many of us try to build this tiny skull-sized kingdom where we are at the center of the universe in our own minds, and we never get outside of ourselves. And I can speak from personal experience with Project Endure that the community aspect is a huge driver, knowing that there are other people that believe in what you believe, are willing to put time, effort, and energy and resources into the mission that you're trying to push forward is a huge driver. And
Absolutely.
the other thing I'll say, Zach, too, is, I think I've realized in my life over and over and over again that you're always one person away from a completely different life. And I have so many examples of that. But it sounds like through this process, you've realized that probably multiple times. Do you have specific connections or people that you can trace back now and be like, man, I'm so glad I took that phone call, or I'm so glad I went out of my way to do that? Yeah.
Dude, I to be honest with you, like Chris Johnson, for those of you that aren't out there, he's this, he's kind of a low key, like honestly, icon in the PT industry. Like he does such amazing work. But he's not really loud or in your face. He's kind of behind the scenes. But I so randomly, like I barely even knew who he was. And I so randomly got connected to him when I was looking for advice as a frantic, 6-month professional. And his conversation, I think literally it shifted the trajectory of my growth. And it channeled, like I clearly had a ton of passion and fire to do things, but he really steered that, I think, in an amazing direction that I'm forever grateful for. So I would say like that's one relationship and one connection and one phone call. I still keep the note on my phone from like the notes that I took from it. But yeah, it's wild. It's like really, truly wild to think about.
Yeah. And I've had so many of those moments in my life. And I think, at least for me, it really picks me up on the days where I'm not feeling it. And I realize that either I could come across a person who might change the trajectory of my life, or I could be that person for someone else, not in an egotistical kind of way, but right, you got to bring the energy. And when you're interacting with other people, the ability to be present, to give your best, to add value where you can, is just, you might never know the impact you had on another person. And that's special.
100%, man. It's crazy. And it just makes life so much more fun when you're having these kind of like transformational relationships, that it's not like, what can I get out of this? But truly genuine, cool things happen.
Couldn't agree more. Now, to get back to the nitty gritty of, you're working 40 hours a week, you're building Level Up on the side, you're probably tired, frustrated, confused, doubting whether or not you should continue on this path. I've been there. I think anybody who's done what you and I have done and are trying to do have experienced that. What was the transition like? Like, how did you get away from that 40 hours a week? Like, how did you figure that out?
I mean, I didn't really. I went down to like 32 hours a week, and I was able to negotiate a similar salary that was, wasn't really taking too much of a pay cut because I did a lot of other things for the company. So I think I did 32 hours for half a year at least. Then the next jump was down to 24 hours. And again, that time renegotiated, took a little bit more of a pay cut, but it wasn't crazy. It was livable. I had some other, some couple of other little resources trickling in, things like nothing crazy, but I was okay with it because it gave me a little bit more time. And that's where I was at until this past December, when we went down to 16 hours a week. Because the truth is, even working 24 hours a week, you know how it is in the insurance model in PT. 24 hours is more like, 28 to 30 hours, especially when you care at the level, when you care about providing high level of care, you end up doing way more outside of what you're compensated for. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that was a huge step. And getting to where we're at now, where it's just trying to find that balance, right? Because where we're at, it's not financially sustainable yet in terms of me being truly full-time. But at the end of the day, like, how can you ever really see what's possible unless you're giving it your full attention? And I think one quote that's always been ingrained in my mind is just like, when everything's important, nothing is important. Or like, you can't, like, when you have one foot in one, door and one foot in the other, it's like you end up giving half your attention to both. And then it's like a shitty end result. And again, easier said than done. And that's why I've been juggling it. Cause at the end of the day, we have bills to pay. We have a mortgage to pay. So I can't just be like totally fiscally irresponsible and be like, screw it, we're going to do this. But slowly working that way, it helps that Steph, my boo, has been crushing it with her own virtual business for ACL rehab. Shout out to ACL Resolve. If you need any rehab assistance, I can tell you she is an absolute baller. So that's helped a lot. But yeah, we're starting to see some potential there, and think it's going to get to a point soon where it's just going to have to, our life isn't going to get any crazier. We're getting married this summer, so something's going to have to give.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to balance there. There's a lot to manage. And the thing I'll say in your story and also in mine is I think to build anything meaningful, you have to invest time into it. And the tricky part is figuring out, how do I free up more time while still taking care of all the things I need to take care of: mortgage, rent, bills, groceries, etc. And you don't have to do it all at once, because I think a lot of times people will either look at what I did, they'll look at what other people did, and they'll be like, man, he made the jump, he took the leap. And I feel like for me, it was like a lot of little steps. It wasn't really a big leap. Maybe it looked like that.
Yeah.
But I think the hard reality is, like, it's not easy. It's not sexy. There are probably a lot of nights that you lose some sleep. There are moments where you're super stressed out and like maybe part of you wants to throw in the towel, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But you keep going. And I think that's a perfect segue to the next question, which is, in your mind, what does the word endurance mean?
Yeah. It's so tough. It's so tough to do it. I think in the simplest way, like, especially based off this conversation, endurance is just like, how long are you truly willing to suffer through physical, mental, emotional? I think it's all to all these different facets. You could be as physically prepared for a race as possible, but how much are you really willing to push the limits and work through it? Same thing on the mental or emotional side. And right, it's going to be different for everyone, and it's not always the easiest thing, but it's just building up that ability to just move forward in the face of that suffering, even though every ounce of your body wants to just throw in the towel.
I'm going to ask you a hard question here, one that we haven't had on the podcast yet, but you used the word suffering. Now, in your mind, is there a difference between struggling and suffering? And if so, what is that difference?
That's a really good question and a really hard question. And I don't know if I'm going to answer it well, but this is where my mind goes. Because the reason I use suffer is because it comes back to like one of our, and again, it's funny, right? You hear this as a core value tossed around sometimes, but truly for us, like passion, right? And when you break down that Latin root, it means to suffer. And it's like, what are you willing to suffer for? So perhaps suffering can be underpinned by like a greater good that's kind of motivating it. It's like, I got to get this time. Like, I got to finish this marathon because it's like part of this identity that you're craving, or, so perhaps that's one way. And where struggling might be, maybe it's less of a thing that you're like striving for an outcome. It's just a very unfortunate situation that you find yourself in, that you're struggling through it. That would be my gut level way of trying to delineate between those two, but I have no clue.
Hey, I put you on the spot. I think that was pretty good. And to be honest, I don't have a great answer. I think of a Viktor Frankl quote when he said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And, I think what you said there is very true, right? Suffering inherently probably has a greater, deeper meaning attached to it. And that's what allows us to endure, is the fact that it's bigger than just us. And I think the times that I've given up on things in my life, when I look back, those things didn't have a meaning that I was able to attach that was bigger than myself. And right. I feel like when you have another person or a group of people or an entire population counting on you, there's this responsibility that comes along with it to continue on, to endure. And I'm wondering, one, if you feel that with what you're building, and two, if that ever feels too heavy or heavy to the point where you feel like, man, I got to figure out a way to get some help myself.
Yeah, well, definitely Yeah, especially recently. Like, I've been someone that's always super transparent about me and my mental health. So that's always been a great vent for me because I've never like, I think there's nothing, everyone should have some sort of mental health professional in their life is probably just a good thing anyway to have. But more recently, it's something that I've been looking into because yeah, just the weight of everything is kind of a lot to bear. And I need more than just talking to Steph or some friends about it. Um, and I don't know, there's days where it's like that really fuels me and fires me up knowing that, but then there's days where it also just feels super heavy and like, geez, it's like the countless years that I've poured into this with really low to no financial benefits at this point in the game, but then getting the like, oh, but thank you so much, you've done so much for the profession. And it's like, yeah, some days that feels really good and keeps me going. And some days I'm just like, oh man, I'm fucking like, this can't be the only compensation that I'm getting, is like these social, like thank yous, which mean the world. But that's the reality of where I'm at, is like, it's tough trying to find that balance.
Yeah, it's heavy. There's another great quote, and again, I'm going to paraphrase, but most people never run far enough on their first wind to find out that they've got a second. And I feel like for me, I've noticed this very physically in running. It's like you start a run, you feel kind of crappy, like it's not going so great. And then 2, 3 miles in, all of a sudden things clicked. You don't know where it came from, and you just feel incredible. And I feel like for me, entrepreneurship has been a lot like that, where you wake up one morning, you feel like you're on top of the world, you have a great day. And then the next morning, 5 things go wrong and you feel like you got ran over by a bus.
The next morning, later that day. Well, Steph will tell you, I'm also a manic SOB. So, those shifts will happen in a day for me.
Yeah. Well, and for me as well. And actually, I'm curious, Zach, because my scenario is similar to yours in some way, but a lot different in others. And the main thing that I'm thinking of now is, my wife she's still in the physical therapy space full time. She works at a hospital. She's happy with a 9 to 5. She likes to go there, come home, leave it there. And I can talk to her about things, but she's not super involved in the physical building of this business. You and Steph, I think, share a lot more in common, and you guys are co-creating something really special. What is that like? What challenges does that present? But also like what benefits are there as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. Steph and I are both super, I mean, it's funny. We were friends for like 6 years, 5 years before we started dating. But it was always, we were both very motivated and passionate about, trying to provide the best care we could for our patients and realizing that things needed to change in our industry. So I think for us, like we enjoyed the work so much that it's just something that like when we first started dating, we like took a concussion course together, like over like virtually, spent the weekend doing that. So like that's our idea of fun in a sick, twisted way. So that's one aspect of it. But I think more recently, I mean, the thing is that while Steph's been a huge co-contributor, co-founder to Level Up and big part of Kalu, like it's not necessarily her baby, her vision, her like sole idea, right? Like obviously she's a massive champion of it. She embodies the values. She's brought so much to the creation of it, but there was always something like missing for her, I think. And so with her starting her ACL business over the last year, I think that's been really good for our relationship because it's something that she's so passionate about and finds so much meaning in. And it's just been a lot of fun because she's able to really focus in on that. I'm able to really focus in on this because there's times where there would be some strain because, if we're both working on like Kalu per se, then sometimes we can butt heads or, I can be very sometimes micromanaging, like I'm so bad at delegating tasks and that sort of thing. And so I'll be like, yeah, you can, like, she's like, how can I help? And I'm like, do this. And I'm like, no, but can you actually do? And so it would end up creating issues. So I think we have a nice balance now where she's still very much involved with what we're doing on the Kalu side of things, especially with mentoring. But creatively, she's able to really pour into her own venture, which I think has been so cool and honestly super inspiring for me because I'm like, okay, let's go. She's getting after it.
You could curse on the podcast, by the way, in case you've been holding back.
I know. I've already dropped like 3 curses though, so I'm trying to keep it respectful.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, what I want to do, Zach, is I want to ask you this last question. And I alluded to it earlier, kind of gave us a taste, but I just want anybody listening to know that this next question is aimed at Zach so he can speak directly to you. And so, Zach, the question is, if somebody's on the other end of this podcast, going through something hard, struggling with something, maybe even suffering for something, and they're just feeling a little bit down, feeling a little bit stuck, and they're lacking a little bit of endurance, what would you say to that person listening to the podcast right now?
It's a good full circle moment because actually, this is something I learned from you, at least explicitly learn from you. I think it's something that we probably sometimes find implicitly. It's just something we do or something that happens, but something that I'm very cognizant of now when I am feeling that way is literally like doing something for someone else and like, helping someone work through something or something. Like if it's your cause or whatever, it's like, I'll be down in the dumps, but if I talk to a student who's going through some shit and I can help them out, or a mentee that's going through some shit and I can help them out, all right, that puts me at 5 curses. I'm really done. That can change your whole day around and change the whole vibe around. And it's really simple. And it's easier said than done sometimes when you're in that place. But I think just like trying to, again, it's one of those things where it has to be authentic. You can't just be like, I need to go help someone, but just like talking to people in your community or your peer group and just doing that, I think can have a really, really impactful effect. And I found that to be really successful for me when I'm feeling that type of way.
Oh man, I didn't realize that rubbed off on you in that way, but I'm so happy it did. And, you expressed it so well. And I think for me, the concept was always about getting outside of myself. And no matter what any of us are going through, there's always somebody out there who's got it just a little bit worse. And not to compare hardships, because hard is hard and it's all relative. But I think if we could always make sure that other people are okay, we'll always be fine. And that's what life is about. And so, Zach, as we wrap up, one, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing your story. And two, if it resonated and people want to connect, they want to follow you, they want to find out more about what you're doing, where are the best places for people to do all that?
Great question. What's my Instagram handle? So I'm just Zak Gabor, ZakGabor.dpt. That's my personal handle. So you can always reach out. I'm an open door. Or if you're interested in some of the clinical business that we do, you can find our Instagram handle at the Level Up Initiative. So that would be it.
Awesome. And for anybody listening, I would highly recommend reaching out to Zach, especially if anything he said resonated with you. I want to bring my part full circle here. And earlier I said, you're always one person away from a completely different life. And Zach, you are one of those people for me, hands down. I know I opened the podcast with how we met, but my trajectory within and now outside of the world of physical therapy specifically has been affected and impacted in such a positive way by you, who you are and what you're doing. So thank you, man. I appreciate you.
That means a lot, Joe. And it's been so cool to watch you do your thing over the last few years. And I loved getting to have you involved in what we're doing. You got to serve as a mentor and give back, but watching you build what you're doing, it's just like, you're just being you, man, and living your best life and making a big impact. So that's what it's all about.
Thank you, man. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.